welcome into the first Carallel or Caregiver Conversation by Carallel, I should say. I'm tongue-tied already here of first session of 2025. So welcome in, Matt Perrin back with you. Sheila Schultz is alongside. Hey, Sheila.
Hey, Matt, how are you today?
I'm great. I'm great. How are you doing?
Very well.
Awesome. Sheila should be a familiar face. If she's not, she's a care advocate here at Carallel, certified dementia practitioner. She does all the things, but most important, she's in the trenches working with family caregivers every day. And excited about this session. Important topic, in my opinion. We're talking about being an advocate during hospital discharge. Before we jump in, a little bit of housekeeping. So we're Carallel. We exist to make caregiving easier for people who are caring for a loved one. That's what our company does. We do it in two ways with our caregiver support line that's staffed by Sheila and many of her colleagues on the care advocate team. And we complement that one-on-one support over phone, email, and chat with our Carallel app. And it's, I think of it as essentially like having a care advocate in your pocket, having someone to guide you, provide personalized advice that's tailored to your situation 24/7 in your pocket, in your purse, wherever you carry your mobile device or your computer. So, and we make our service available through insurance companies and employers across the country. So, if you have access to the service, wonderful. If you're not sure, ask your employer, ask your health plan whether or not they offer Carallel as a benefit. So that is the housekeeping that I want to get out of the way. And I guess the second thing, as we're jumping in, please join us in the conversation. If you have questions or perspectives to share, anything like that, we'd love to hear them. And you can just use the chat function down at the bottom of the screen. So, okay, Sheila, let's talk about hospital discharge. It is a welcomed milestone more often than not, right? If somebody's been in the hospital, getting out is a good thing, but it doesn't necessarily mean the person that's leaving the hospital is healthy per se, right? And I guess more importantly, in the context of this conversation, because this is about caregiving, it usually represents a new normal for the family caregiver, right? So that's what we're going to be hitting on today. We're going to be talking a little bit about why it's so intense, what makes this sort of period of time for a family caregiver so intense, and most importantly, sort of some things we can be doing as caregivers that can make it a little bit at least easier. So and I want to start with this data, Sheila. Tell me if you're surprised or not. But I think, and I apologize, I don't know the source, which is bad form for a TV host like me. I believe it's AARP data, but I think 18 million people were discharged from the hospital last year. So, and more than half of them, 52% thereabouts, needed continued care where they were going next, whether it was home, a rehab, or something like that. And then 80% of that care at home is provided by, you guessed it, family caregivers. What do you think about those numbers?
It's overwhelming for most people. I think, a lot of people have already been caring for that person if they've been on their way to surgery or on their way to hospitalization. So I think that the thing that kind of a theme to think about is there are things that we don't typically think about, little things that you may have not considered for after they get home, which is very different than before they went in.
Right. So you just hit on something. So, oftentimes the person or people waiting for the person at home, if they're going home, to help them after the hospital, they've already been doing this, right? So chances are moderate to high that they're already exhausted, right? They're well into their caregiving experience, right? So that sort of cumulative nature is a big part, in my opinion, of what what makes this, or what can make caregiving after discharge such an intense sort of moment in time. Um, and it just the way it adds up, right? But and it's also, we'll talk about this, but it's also a little bit of a that can also sort of catch a caregiver by surprise. It did for me the one time my mom had a hospital stay, sort of in the middle of our caregiving, which is like, oh, I got this. I've been doing this forever, or for a long time. What's so different about this? Well, she needed X, Y, and Z, all that sort of stuff. So,
Right.
um, it's almost the intensity kind of has a way of compounding, I guess, is the way I
Yeah,
think about it.
if you haven't thought it through, not only are you tired already, but they're weaker, so everything's different.
Correct. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, yeah, it's a big swing. Um,
Hmm.
it's like a basketball team missing an open layup, and then the other team goes down and hits a three-pointer. It's about as
That's
bad
good.
as it gets.
Right.
Okay, so and the other part of this for the caregiver, are there a lot there's a lot of moving parts. It's starting with the emotions, right?
Hmm.
That you may be feeling in that time, like um, it's within reason to think that some caregivers, depending on the situation, might be sort of nervous, anxious, afraid. Maybe they don't feel like their loved one's ready to be leaving the hospital.
You bet.
Um, there could be emotional impact that they're picking up from the person they're caring for, right?
Hmm.
The emotions, and then all of the coordination, right? Like,
Right.
who are they? Like, just let's talk about some of that. Like, um, who do people need to be coordinating with, get preparing for?
Right,
Um,
right. Well, there's people and there's places and there's things and places to go and things to do. Of course, you've got all the doctors. If there's a surgeon involved, your primary care doctor, there's a discharge planner, who's in charge of coordinating the leaving of the hospital. Then once you get home or even to another facility, if they're going into rehab, then there's, occupational therapies or some kind of rehab. You might need home care aides. There's equipment. There's all kinds of things, medications.
yeah, yeah. Um, okay, so yeah, a lot of dots to be connecting, and you know that usually falls on the family caregiver.
Right.
I wish it weren't that way. But as we're segueing to sort of some of the things that we'd suggest people try and do to sort of get ahead of the game, make things easier. It really starts with, like, it starts before, and I'm just throwing this out there, but it starts before sort of leaving is on the horizon, right? Because
Hmm.
sometimes what happens is it can catch you by surprise. Like, you know, you come in one day and say, all right, well, we'll be ready to go tomorrow, or, the day after that, or something like that, right? So, which condenses the time that that a caregiver has to do all of the coordination that you were just talking about, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So what do you think about, um, you should be trying to be proactively communicating with the care team throughout the hospital stay, but that should be one of the things on your list, right? Like, it's not, hey, when are we going home necessarily, but it's, you know, what is that time? What does this timeline look like? I want to be prepared, right? So it's almost like finishing the sentence.
Yeah, and I think when you initially have that conversation with the doctors who say, we think there's a hospitalization, sometimes it's an emergency and they go in and you're not, you didn't expect it. But
Mhm.
oftentimes it's ahead of time and it's scheduled. So that then you
Mhm.
certainly have enough time. But I think after we go through some of the things today, even if it is an emergency surgery, you'll have a good list of things to make sure you have in hand so that you can plan and organize and be as prepared as possible.
Okay. Okay. So let's um let's talk about some of these things that we can be doing, and um again, just underscoring some of these what's the best way to say this? Some of these pertain directly to discharge, um, the immediate sort of lead up to discharge, but some are they're about sort of making things easier for you and therefore for the person you're caring for at discharge, but they start earlier, right?
Right.
And this
Hmm.
first idea that I was thinking about was, and it's simple. None of this is like often in these sessions, we're maybe not telling people things that they don't know all of the time, but it's about talking about it for the purpose of well, because it's hard to keep all of this straight when you're in the middle of it, right?
Right. Right.
When you're in the middle of it, it's hard to think about, um, it's hard to think as clearly as you would when you're not under stress or in a pressurized situation. So,
Hmm.
and the first idea I had was keeping the primary care informed, right?
Hmm.
Like a lot of times that'll happen naturally. The system will take care of that, but we
Right.
can't necessarily rely on the system taking care of it, right?
Absolutely.
So being proactive in um, keeping the primary care up to speed on what's happening. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on
So
that?
Matt, when your mom went into the hospital, so that's the thing. So I don't know if it was an emergency, but if it is, all of a sudden she's in the hospital. And one of the first things you should make sure is that her primary care physician is aware of where she is and what's going on.
Right. Yeah, and it wasn't. So that's a good example. So in my mom's case, it was she had a primary care. Um, she also had a neurologist. She was living with dementia. So this hospital stay was actually driven by the neurologist.
Mhm.
So they knew. So
Right.
so part of the team knew, but not the
Right.
whole team, right? And uh, anyway, long story that I won't belabor, but it would have been beneficial for me to call the primary care's office and let them know what was going on. Um,
Absolutely.
and I'm not shaming myself for not doing that, but I'm just laying in retrospect the facts bare. It would have made my life a little bit easier in a couple of specific points down the road.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and okay, so that's one is sort of keeping primary care posted, let's say, right?
Hmm.
And I guess by just reiterating, by primary care, I'm talking about like your person's sort of typical care team, let's say. Um, so the second is document, right? And there's two parts to this, in my opinion. One is like, um, the documents that you want to have. We talk frequently about in these sessions, things like a healthcare power of attorney, and authorization forms to so that you can talk with your loved one's insurance provider, stuff
Hmm.
like that. But I'm also talking about like documenting, like even me, like documenting who am I interacting with, like who's helping my mom
Yes.
in my case, like who
Yeah.
are they, what are their title, what are they supposed to be doing, right? So asking those questions so that I can try and put the puzzle pieces together in my head, but also doing my best to keep a record of it just so I can reference it again, because when you're in the middle of all this, you can't, it's difficult to think straight.
I think you are so spot on with that one, Matt, because, and you just keep a notebook with you. You meet someone, they say their name, they say their title, and 5 minutes later, you're going to forget, what did they do again?
Yeah.
So just write, this is what we discussed. Here's who I spoke to. Here's her role or his role.
Yeah.
And then it's all down on paper and you can go back and go, oh yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I think of this as sort of, and you're hitting, I'm glad you mentioned that because it's that, but it's also, oh, what's your name again? Like, and what do you do? And can
yeah.
you explain it to me like I'm five? Like
Hmm.
I would literally say things like that just so I understand what their purpose is. And then
Right.
if you want to get really greedy, well, okay, do you like how do you how do you fit with everyone else or
Right.
these people, right? So because it
Right.
it 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 can be hard to get that picture.
Hmm.
And if nothing else, this sort of taking these sort of steps, like in some way, it provides at least at a minimum some peace of mind for you, because at least for me, when I was caregiving, I spent half my time just feeling like I was so by the seat of my pants, didn't know what was going on. Again, no fault of my own. I was doing my best, but
Yeah.
like, and I didn't like that. That didn't feel good. I always
Mm-hmm.
felt just sort of like out of sorts.
Right.
So, uh, not just documenting, but actually like being curious to and slash courageous to ask those questions,
Hmm.
and then write them down. Like like it feels good to know that stuff because
Sure.
it's something you're doing to, it's like an outlet for you almost
Yep.
underneath just the fact that it's good to know, and you can, if that help, that having that picture helps you advocate.
Absolutely. I love it. I love it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So the second is, and you mentioned this person, or the third, sorry. So we've keeping the primary care posted, documenting, and we've added a little bit to that, being curious and asking those questions. Um, you mentioned the discharge planner.
Hmm.
Uh, Probably the most, when it comes to leaving the hospital, again, whether it's someone's going home to a rehab facility, back to their senior living community, whatever. Um, Discharge planner, incredibly important. And and you were saying their role is.
Well, I want to back up a little bit and say this is the number one thing when I talk to people that they don't realize exists. I think people look at this in very big generalities, like the hospital is going to release or discharge my loved one, and they see it as a big, like this entity is doing this. Well, there's a specific person who's been given the responsibility to coordinate that transition from that place to the next place. And they do a lot of different things. So
Mhm.
they're very involved in the specific planning to return home or to rehab. They're very much in contact with referrals to different like home health or other kinds of care. They will help you if you need some training. Sometimes the hospital itself has some training for caregivers. So they're going to ask questions like that, to know if you're
Mhm.
prepared. Follow-up appointments, making sure you have all your medications and understand how to use them, how you're going to get home, transportation. The discharge planner is your friend.
Right, right. Or I would sort of tweak that slightly. You need to make them. They are they're like a lifeblood when it comes to, because they may
Mhm.
not be your friend. And the reason I say that
I see
is,
what you're saying.
and I feel this way, and this is my personal experience. Um, like I had this thinking, I worked with a social worker at a certain point in my caregiving experience with my mom, right? And it's similar to a discharge planner, they do very different things. They're different professionals,
Mhm.
but they're a resource, of invaluable resource. Okay, in theory, right? They should be. What I didn't fully understand when I started working with a social worker in this sort of parallel is there was a certain level of responsibility or accountability that I had to get what I needed from the social worker,
Mhm. Mhm.
because not all of them are the same.
Right.
It's like any other profession. Some people are really good at their jobs, really, really, people you connect
Organized.
with. Other
Right.
people aren't, right?
Right.
And that's just fact of life. And it's the same with social workers, same with discharge planners. So
Yeah.
it what you described, Sheila, I take as the things that a discharge in a the things that a discharge planner should be doing,
Yes.
right? And it
Yes.
may take you pulling it out of them, is the point that I
Yep.
wanted to make.
So I'll switch that to make friends with a discharge
Yeah,
planner.
yeah.
Make friends with them.
Well, however you generally, kindness is good and important, and make friends is I think a great aspirational approach to it.
Right.
But they are a resource for you. Do what you can to get everything you can out of them,
You
um,
bet.
because their purpose should be to make the transition out of the hospital to wherever smooth and
Yes.
successful.
Yes.
Sorry, I had to get that off my chest because that is a really, really important.
It
Like
is.
and just talking about it, I can feel I'm brought back to that time when
I
I
sense
cycled
that.
through three different social workers that I just and and I tell you, like the feeling when I knew instantly when I had the one,
Yes, you
it
do
was
know.
like just somebody dumping like a bucket of rainbows and unicorns down my. It was like the best feeling ever. It was phenomenal.
Yeah, that's great.
And it's the same with the discharge planner. So let's talk about, and this is really, really important, probably the
Yeah.
most important piece in my opinion. Let's talk about questions to be asking the discharge
Hmm.
planner. And you just teased a bunch of them, but these are questions to be asking, and so things like, what setting is your loved one going to? What will they need help with? And it's important to ask these questions because they're in your words. They're not in medical speak,
Right,
right?
right.
So, if someone in the hospital is telling you, well, your loved one's going to need this, that, a catheter, this, whatever, using medical terminology, like you may or may not understand. I don't understand half of it, right? So,
Hmm.
like trying to get them to explain to you in everyday language
Right.
what what to expect, frankly. So,
Hmm.
what will my loved one need help with? Is, is there referrals you mentioned? Is there a preferred provider that you'd recommend? What medications will they need? What are they for? Like asking we talk about this a lot,
Yeah.
but until you have absolute clarity, keep asking the questions.
Right, right. And so all of those questions we typically ask someone, even if you're talking about what kind of medical equipment they need or supplies, what do they need? How often will they need it? How do I get it? Who do I
Yeah.
call? Like
Does the
these,
doctor write a prescription for home health or for
right.
medical for if they need a walker or a shower chair or whatever it is, like is a prescription going to be written for that? Who do I
Absolutely. There's so
contact?
much.
When we leave, and if I have questions, who do I contact?
Hmm.
What's the phone number?
Yes.
Um, so these are the types of, we're rapid fire here because I'm looking at the clock. Um, but
Well, I
but
just
that,
want to say one thing about the
yeah.
needing help. What will they need help with? I would really encourage you to get very specific. Because if they say they might need some help walking, well, what does that exactly mean? Is it just one person that's going to help them? Will I have to have someone else help them?
Hmm.
Get really down to the nitty gritty and imagine them in your house. If they're saying they're going to have trouble transferring or moving from a chair to standing or standing to sitting, what will that look like in your house? So really kind
Hmm.
of think ahead specifically what that means and then keep asking different questions. Can I do
Hmm.
this? What about that? Do I need more help?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, and it's a really good segue to the other sort of the other side of this coin. So we're talking about the questions,
Hmm.
um, but there will likely be questions asked of you
Hmm.
and the person you're caring for, and or right. So questions like, um, what's the home situation? And this may be by the discharge planner or when you first go into the hospital, what have you. But what is your home situation? Does anyone live with you?
Hmm.
And you may have someone you could be you could have someone that lives with you and you could say yes. Um, but in reality, they may or may not be able to help you. Like, and if let's just say they can't help you, if you just say yes to that question, what they're hearing, what the person at the hospital who's asking you is hearing is has help in the home. So
Right.
like they're marking you down as like you as though you have help, um, uh, when your loved one gets home. You have help. You have someone that's going to help you care for them. When
Hmm.
in reality, that may not be the case. So
Right.
point is, like, I'm just really glad you mentioned being specific, Sheila, because it works both ways. When you're asked things, you need to be specific, um,
Right.
or try and be as specific as possible, because that is they won't get a full picture otherwise, right?
Yeah. And I
Um,
think another thing to bring up about being specific and having concerns, if you're at all concerned that you cannot handle this, be really obvious. I mean, and I think a great word is like, I'm not sure if this is a safe thing to do. I'm concerned about safety. That is a word that they're going to listen to. And then they might ask you more questions. Why do you think that? Who's not safe? Is it the patient or is it you? And explain more. That's a thing I really tell people about. You don't just have to say, okay, this is what I'm going to have to deal with because they said I need to. You're allowed to talk about why you don't think that's appropriate.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and yeah, just so like the context here, and that's another just really good point is the context of what's happening is, um, oftentimes when someone's leaving the hospital, regardless of where they're going, they're not, it doesn't mean they're healthy. It means it means they're at a point where they don't need a hospital, the level of care that the hospital is providing,
Hmm.
right? But that's very different from doesn't need care. And and
Yeah.
and and let's be honest about it. There's not a lot of training or any
Hmm.
maybe that is like you're not as a caregiver being trained to provide this care. You're being handed oftentimes a packet of discharge
Right.
instructions and say follow this. So, well, that's not training. So I say that just to sort of uh, emphasize what you're talking about that there, Sheila, in terms of being obvious, being specific, and um, yeah, a little bit hyperbole, but be loud about it. I don't mean
Hmm.
yell, but be loud. Like, don't just be silent on it. And
Right.
and that can be easy to do in this context. Think about it. You're in a hospital, medical. Like, I found it difficult to talk. I do this for a living. Um, we help family caregivers, and I still find it difficult to talk to a doctor.
Hmm.
Never mind in the middle when they're, it feels like they have 30 seconds and they're doing rounds in a hospital. Like it's so, but none of that should matter. If there are questions or uncertainties or fears, um, speak up about them.
Hmm.
Is well, I guess that's my parting thought. Now I'm just looking at the clock. Um,
Yeah. I
and you these things like so many other times in these sessions, Sheila, we just talked about a bunch of different little aspects of this. Um, and they really do add up to make things a little bit easier. Maybe a lot
Mhm.
easier in your it depends. It's going to vary, but these are things that will lighten your load, whatever size it is in that moment, right?
Right.
Um, so, what are your closing thoughts, Sheila? We're at the bottom of the
Uh,
hour.
okay. So once again, ask questions, be super specific. As you get those answers back in, if you start feeling concerned about it, let them know that. Also think about who might be able to help you at home. Kind of build that team together too, who might be able to do transportation or meals or things. So, you're gathering a lot of information. So asking the questions, um, and then giving them some responses back as to how you're going to do that as far as safety is concerned. And then make sure you know who to contact after the fact when things go wrong. Who do I call first? What do I do?
Got it. Yeah, I agree. And I just had one other thought, closing thought. So I I fibbed, um, which was the after hospital is a moment of intensity in your caregiving, um, but it will. I don't want to say subside, but you will adjust. You can adjust. You've adjusted. Um, you know how many countless times throughout your caregiving experience, and the same will happen here. Our hope for a conversation like this is to give you some ideas and some things to think about and some things to sort of orient you when if and when you find yourself in that situation that make that adjustment um, a little bit easier. So um, I did see one question come in and I can't actually see it. Um, so I guess just to that question asker just came in, if you could just respond to your registration email, and um, we will be happy to personally address that question, um, or share that perspective if that's what you're trying to do. Thank you, Sheila. Actually, one other thing, sorry, I just forgot. We do have our schedule for 2025 up. I'm going to drop that in the chat here. You'll see all of our sessions once a month. The next one, I believe, is, let's see, February 20th at
20th.
noon Eastern, and we're talking about this one. This topic I love. We're talking about when family makes caregiving difficult.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, talk about a loaded topic.
Right.
But okay, thank you so much. We'll talk to you on February 20th. Sheila, appreciate you. Thanks everyone for being here.
Take good care.
Take good care.